Everyone, it's Spicysushi. So today I'm going to go over my starter for 3.27 Archmage Ice Nova of Frostbolts. So this skill got heavily nerfed in 3.26, but it's still overpowered and can achieve tens of millions of DPS on a reasonable budget while remaining decently tanky due to Mind Over Matter mana scaling. I started this in Mercenaries League and it felt great, so I don't think there's going to be any problems. This is a last minute guide because I didn't know so many people wanted an updated Archmage guide, so there will be continuous updates all the way into Friday, such as loot filters for the campaign and maps, as well as additions to the PoB layouts, so definitely stay tuned for that if anything looks incomplete. The build levels with Firestorm and switches to Ice Nova of Frostbolts before maps. This is a transfigured gem that comes from Mercenary Lab, so you can farm it there or simply buy it off of trade like I usually do. Through like doing heist or just from the chaos that I drop in the campaign, I can usually get it. You can easily go into maps with Firestorm or Ball Lightning of Orbiting, but personally, I just like to be Ice Nova from white maps. I'll have a full leveling run linked below done by Exile. Leveling has not changed in the past year other than Shield Charge being an option over Leap Slam if you'd like to do that instead. It is actually faster as well. So anyway, the build uses the unique helmet Katava's Thirst, which makes the skill a one-button playstyle, using it to proc our Frostbolts that our Ice Novas will be projecting off of, and it also lets us automate curses, which is really nice later on in the build. The next important skill is going to be Frostblink of Wintry Blast, also a transfigured gem. This is going to allow us to achieve super fast mapping very early on into the character by stacking lots of cast speed because it has no cooldown like regular Frostblink. The pros and cons. So the clear is very solid for a League starter, though outscaled by fast mappers like Kinetic Blast later on, since you can't clear just the entire screen with Ice Nova despite having pretty fast speed from Frostblink. Since Archmage doesn't need anything other than life, resistance, and crafted mana on rares until like T17 level content, it makes the build extremely cheap compared to other League starters since we don't care about evasion, armor, ES, spell suppression, fizz damage reduction, stuff like that. We just get all of that through mana, though we do want to scale those things later on as content becomes harder. Usually I can wear wands all the way from Act 10 to Uber bosses. Sometimes I will, I'm going to get upgrades along the way, but there have been situations like that. Damage scaling from stacking mana is just so strong that it makes it possible. Now, the downsides, the burst of Archmage relies on taking advantage of Arcane Cloak windows. This is where most of the damage in the build comes from, and it can feel pretty clunky for people, so it is definitely an acquired taste. It can be very button intensive as well compared to other builds for Uber boss level content, and it can be frustrating solving mana issues, but I'll go over all your options for that in the PoB. This video is going to be mainly going over all of the intricacies of the build and giving you options on how to solve problems that people have brought to me over the past 4 league starts that I've played this build and I've been able to solve. So my favorite day 1 strategy with this build is Boss Rush Silo. I think this build is perfect for it. I put together this level 90 setup from the PoB section to showcase what T16s are like on the build with just basic life res and crafted rares, or crafted mana rares and like 3 mod wands, like 2 mods and a crafted mod. Frostblink does the heavy lifting in maps, so you don't see me use Ice Nova really until the boss room since we link Archmage to Frostblink, so it does a lot of damage. Most likely, I'm not ever really going to use Ice Nova unless we run across really tanky like rares with the new breach mechanic and, bosses at the end. So when I get to the boss room, I just drop Sigil of Power and Frost Shield and hold down right click. Uber bossing is a bit more complicated on the other hand. I'm going to showcase an Uber Shaper here, which is what I typically like to do early on in the league since it's the easiest of the Uber bosses. You absolutely do not want to automate your Arcane Cloak for this content. So normally you can link automation support to it so that it just goes off on its own, but for this content, you're going to see me manually press it and also line up all of my other, DPS cooldowns, I guess you'll call them, with this Arcane Cloak window. And you'll see me be patient here. I actually walk around, dodge Shaper's mechanics, make sure he's in a position where he's standing still, and then I can just pop all of my stuff at once and just burst him down. And as you saw in the video, I actually stood in the corner and just tanked the balls. I make sure to have 2 Sapphire Flasks. They're in the Uber Boss loadout is in the PoB, and you'll see I have like 2 Sapphire Flasks that I rotate between for the boss, depending on the Uber that I'm doing. So you do have to be a bit patient, and it is clunky, but I do really enjoy how strong the build pumps on this type of budget. All right, short section on the new breach mechanic. So the new crafting tree, I think, is going to be really important to invest to early on, since with just a few points, we can start to drop linked body armors, which opens up access to potentially a super early 6-link. Ziggy D in his video actually dropped multiple 5 links in Act 4, so I think investing all of your early points into those is going to be the play, with a focus on int and int strength armor. Since while evasion bases are super important later on for avoidance, I think it's just too hard to work with early on, since we have no like green sockets in our 6-link, and we can actually refund all of those points for free and put them elsewhere later. This is definitely going to be the play for early. Now, the new rune graphs. I haven't really seen one yet that I'm like super set on. I think I'll just play around with ones that give massive damage on bosses and see which one I like the most. There is one that gives lucky lightning damage to the player, but we don't actually have much damage that can be lucky, since we play Archmage and it's a set value, it's not a range. But there is a percentage of our damage which does have a range, like if we use Wrath or we have some flat damage on wands or something, and also the Radiant Ground itself gives flat damage, so this is potentially an option if it's the best. Otherwise, I'm just going to go with something that gives massive damage on a boss, like just a massive hit, but there could be some other choices. Now, for our Bloodline Ascendancy, there is one that got teased very recently that's going to let us ignore all lightning resistance of monsters if we wear 2 of the new ring base. Now, our rings are kind of set, but we can actually drop Anathema with this later on, and that relieves a lot of socket pressure because we have to dedicate so many sockets to use Anathema to curses. So I think this is a pretty solid play once we can actually craft some decent rings to replace our Dream Fragments and Anathema. All right, quick PoB Yap session. I will have a notes section that I make before League start in the PoB to cover all of this and more when I think of more things to talk about, as people bring more questions to me in the comments or Discord. But the number one thing is mana management that I want to talk about, because it did get nerfed last patch. Sanctuary of Thought now gives mana regen instead of mana cost, and so we do need to go elsewhere for our mana management. It was really easy before. It's not so easy now, but you do have a lot of options. My number one go-to at the start in Trade League is to just get a pair of Worm Signs. These are super cheap common gauntlets. They give you a lot of mana cost reduction since you have 4 endurance charges. As you see here, my mana cost per second is 730. Without these gloves, it goes over 1,000, so it makes a massive impact for super cheap early on. Your next best option is to path down to Tireless. What people usually do is they drop the Instant Leech setup over here, since it's a ton of points for Instant Leech, but in my opinion, until you have like actual block on the build and a lot of avoidance, dropping this feels really bad in my opinion. I tried it in Mercenaries, immediately took it back until I went to the Fallen setup. So I am probably not going to be pathing down to there. In my opinion, honestly, Worm Signs paired with the Mana Refund Mastery, which is not accounted for in PoB, that's important to note, is perfectly fine until you get a Clarity Watcher's Eye off of trade. Now, this Clarity Watcher's Eye is going to stack with your mana refund, and you're going to have a 23 to like 25% chance to recover 10% of mana, which makes mana super easy to manage as when you pair it with Mind Drinker. Very easy to access, only 2 teals and a Verdant Oil. Damage scaling. So as you see, the wands don't have any flat damage, like added damage to spells, and they don't have any plus levels because that's not how you scale Archmage damage. You're actually just going to be running mana, like max mana, cast speed, spell damage, and like crit and DD. I would say the most important mod to look out for is definitely mana, because mana not only scales your damage, but also your defense. The next most important, in my opinion, is cast speed, because it not only scales damage, but also your speed by scaling Frostblink of Wintry Blast. And then next is going to be spell damage, because the build doesn't actually have a whole lot of increased damage compared to the insane amount of flat damage from Archmage. And lastly, on the crit setup, I do spell crit, and then later on, you can go for like DD while focused, etc. for uber bossing. What's really nice though is that since max mana and cast speed, etc. are pretty high weight, you're going to be able to make wands very easily, either just identifying them off the ground or gambling them at the vendor. So, or ROG, for example. Now, some important notes. The Elemental Mastery, came up a lot last league at least. On the level 90 setup, when we don't have Anathema set up yet, we want to run the Invert Mastery, which gives like 16% more damage. You need to make sure that you swap off of this when you put on Anathema, because if you don't, you're going to be doing actually 4.8% less damage. It is a less damage multiplier if you forget to swap it over. That came up a lot. Another thing is Arcane Cloak. You want to make sure that you link Arcane Cloak to automation support and that it is on. Arcane Cloak is most of your damage and defense in the build, and so if you aren't automating this, you're basically not playing the build. So make sure that you have automation support linked to Arcane Cloak and that you make sure that it's on. Next thing is Eternal Blessing. Make sure when you reserve your aura, you're not putting it on your mana. You're actually linking it to Eternal Blessing because this is going to make it have no reservation, although it'll be your only aura. And now that we're on Grace, I'll go ahead and talk about evasion. The number one issue that you're going to have on Archmage is going to... Okay, there's two main issues on early Archmage. It's going to be stun, and it's going to be evasion. Porcupines, mainly. Porcupines, if you don't have any evasion, porcupines are going to nuke you. Now, the way you solve this is you get a Jade Flask ASAP. You want to make sure you have a Jade Flask. It may be annoying to press early on, but you really have to, again, if you have, like, 0 avoidance on your build outside of your Jade Flask, but Grace Eternal Blessing is going to pair really well with that. Even having something as low as 8,000 evasion rating is going to make porcupines a joke compared to just getting a shotgunned out immediately. Purity of Elements is my preferred aura eventually, but early on, Grace is superior. Now, if you're forced into using Purity of Elements because you need it for resistance, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you do have a Jade Flask, though, or else it's going to be a little bit painful. Now, the reason it's so low, though, is because we're using a Conquest Chainmail on this early setup. I mentioned it earlier, but if we want to go to Evasion ES spaces later, but early on, we don't have any actual green gems. So using an Evasion base is really annoying because you're going to be spending a lot of chromatics if you decide to do that, which I don't recommend. So stun. Stun is dealt with by running, getting a chance to avoid stun effect on a flask will help a lot paired with the practical applications points. This is going to give 40% chance to avoid stun while casting. Paired with the flask is pretty fine, and the Pantheon for stun. But if that is not enough, there are actually stun points, I believe, over here. This will cap you out, definitely. Or just taking... making sure this mastery is selected here. 50% of your ES is added to your stun threshold. Well, it's going to be annoying if you don't have any stun avoidance at all. You're going to get to the boss room, you're going to start casting, and then a boss is just going to repeatedly just micro-stun you over and over. It's going to be very annoying, which is why stun is pretty important to solve until we eventually get to the block setup. Because once we get to the block setup, you don't really deal with stun much anymore. We can even drop instant leech. I'll probably test that in game and see if it feels fine without Fallen. But yeah, flasks. Last thing is flasks. So I like to run an Amethyst as soon as possible because, getting Chaos Res early is not easy to do, especially because I like to run uniques on this build. I do a Quartz Flask for phasing. No other reason. You can switch this out for a Stibnite easily for the Smoke Cloud, which will blind enemies, or you can even run a Granite just for some armor. The Quicksilver Flask, I know that we are moving with Frostblink, but you are not looting with Frostblink, and you loot a lot early in a league. There's a lot of stuff to pick up off the ground, and the Quicksilver helps a lot with that, or else it's going to be really awkward. And then obviously the Jade Flask, like I said, and a Corrupted Blood Divine Flask helps a lot as early as you can get that. You can craft that in the Menagerie. But yeah, everything else is just life, res, rares. When you're playing the game, you're just going to be picking up gear off the ground, and if it has life, it has res, and an open prefix, you craft mana, and you are good to go. It's really simple. The main thing is just getting this Katava's Thirst as early as possible. But yeah, I'll have a notes section. I'm going to flesh this out. Ask any other questions that you have in the comments or on my Discord, at me on my Discord, or ask me on stream. And I will continue to update everything as as we get closer to launch. But yeah, I'll see you guys then.